So we began this partnership again with Joshua Tree National Park to look at their ecosystem and to help them monitor the populations of the species they have in that very special place to make sure that they can sustain them. So this is just a look at Joshua Tree National Park. Again, I'm down here in Palm Desert. So it runs from the I-10 essentially up to the 62, that's Yucca Valley, 29 Palms Marine Base. So we've got gradients, as we say. So more winter rain to the west, higher mean annual temperature towards Arizona. So got a lot of different areas of climate in the park. So a really good place to study plants, as a matter of fact. So in this picture is the location of all our plots that we have across the park, including weather stations. And so when we're looking at what might happen to the Joshua trees, we're focused on something we call Refugio, which is where does the species occur now that can also occur in the future. So if we were looking at this landscape, the old distribution might be in red here. This is where the species occurs now. This is where my model that I'll talk about in a second shows it can occur in the future, but what's that overlap? Because we want to think that Joshua trees or other species can move to some other place. If it heats up, we don't know that. And especially for Joshua trees, they're only distributed by ground squirrels. So they can't move very far, and then they have to have the Biaka moth. So we really have to focus on what we know, which is they grow in, let's say, this space now, and they can persist in the future. And then this is therefore a very important refuge or refugia to protect the species within it. So prior research had shown that habitat, this was at a very coarse scale, might be reduced by the end of century. The trees threatened by invasive species and fire. I actually toured a fire site 2 days ago with Mojave Desert Land Trust, looking at an area that had burned, and they're really concerned about the reproduction of Joshua trees at that site. So it's something that they're not adapted to, and is a problem for them. And again, no long distance dispersal agent. So how do they make these jumps to other cooler climates is a question. And then where are the young ones in the landscape? So shifts in geography, when we think about plants moving, they're not going to get up and just walk away. What happens is, this happens over time. They reproduce more in some place and less in another place. And where are they going to be in the future? Where they're reproducing better, where there are more young trees or young plants. So that's what we decided to look at. How are Joshua tree populations weathering what's already been a rapid climate change? So we put together what's called a habitat model, essentially a bunch of variables that describe landscape, temperature, soil, etc. And then we took GPS point data for Joshua trees, put those together, and the model gives us an idea of projected habitat. And we can give it current temperature, and then we can give it future temperature as well. So that's what we did to get not only current, but future. And what do we use for climate layers? Well, there's something called the business as usual scenario. If we all keep doing exactly what we're doing now and populations continue to increase, that's called the business as usual scenario. And here's a look at a document that was produced out of UC Riverside, the Inland Desert Summary Report. And it looks at, so this is looking at inland deserts, what would happen from now to 2100, the increase in temperature if we do nothing, business as usual. So you can see it goes from, about 82.5 there, right, to a little over 90 degrees. This is the average maximum summer temperature. So that's a little frightening. So we hope that doesn't happen. If we mitigate it, as we say, if we do take steps to reduce greenhouse gases, we'd see something like the mitigated scenario, and then highly mitigated is what we really want at this point, which would be we take major steps to address our greenhouse gases and we see less of an increase in temperature. So what we did is we produced some models. So this is the historic range in Joshua Tree National Park. So I just took all the point data, matched it with the climate variables, and the model says, okay, this is where it could occur on the landscape right now, as predicted by the model. So this is where we have historically nice, healthy Joshua trees. Then we look at the highly mitigated scenario. So again, we're going from this nice, healthy Joshua trees, a lot of the park, into the highly mitigated scenario. So that's 19%. Only about 20% of the range would be suitable towards end of century. Again, we're talking about 2100, but that is within many people's lifetimes. So that's pretty frightening. So even 2070 to 2100 was the range that the climatologists gave us for that particular data set. So 2100, we might be looking at this. If we only moderately mitigate things, maybe 14% of historic range. And if really do not mitigate due to climate change. This is a photo I took of a Joshua tree laying down, looking very sad. And so that would be probably 0.02 of the historic range. So really none of the Joshua trees within Joshua Tree National Park. So again, I want to be clear, we restricted this analysis to Joshua Tree National Park and actually environs to the north. But we wanted to help Joshua Tree in particular steward their resources. And if Joshua trees are in trouble here, they're going to be in trouble across the Mojave. So, but that's what these numbers mean. But, you know, all models are wrong and some are useful. It is likely that this model is not perfectly right. That's just a fact. We know we can't take everything perfectly seriously, but it gives us an indication of what might happen. But we want to validate it. Say, you know, we're seeing some changes we think, but let's go out and really see what's happening on the ground. So we participate in community science here. So we have volunteers, different student groups, all sorts of people, local people, people from all over the world come in and do science with us in the park. And essentially, we went across the park, counted and measured all the Joshua trees in 14 macroplots, over 4,000 trees we counted and measured to try to get at, you know, where are the Joshua trees reproducing best already? And is this changed due to any kind of, you know, hotter temperatures? This is what a macroplot looks like on the lower left there. That is a map of all of the Joshua trees within that plot. And I made the size of the tree correspond to the size of the bubble there. So you can see just the density of all the trees we counted at that plot. So there's a lot of hard work by a lot of fantastic folks. So another aspect to this is, you know, when we're talking about climate change, obviously there has been a politicization, there's some politics surrounding this issue, which is too bad because we're talking about the, you know, my livelihood, the work we do, and we take it really seriously. But we, you know, allowing the members of the public to gather and analyze the scientific data with us helps, you know, have the conversation, have mutual respect, I think. And then, you know, it's good data science quality as well. It makes us question sometimes things that we are doing routinely. So it's a really great relationship we have between scientists and the public. So what did we find? So we went out, measured, you know, what we call recruitment, essentially where are the small Joshua trees. This is a photo I took up at Eureka Peak, which is a really cool place to go up in Joshua Tree. It's way down a dirt road. So where are the high recruiting macroplots and where are the low recruiting macroplots? This MDL location is actually where I was touring the burn scar a couple days ago. So that is Mojave Desert Land Trust land, which is also a partner on the study. And unfortunately, that was a low recruiting macroplot. But if you notice, in gray, I have here the modeled suitable habitat at end of century. And in gray, this is the optimistic scenario. And they're basically the higher recruitment was correlated in space to this gray area. So essentially the trees are already starting to have more seedlings, reproduce better in these areas that are closer to where we think they will be happy in the future. So we're already seeing some shift in where young trees are occurring. At some of these plots way away from what we predict are Refugio, we're almost seeing hardly any recruitment at those specific plots. There are certainly young Joshua trees throughout the park, but tendency towards more in these gray areas. So we're already seeing a shift. So, you know, it's sadly, as I said, California desert species aren't adapted to wildfire. They are, you know, normally there would be, annuals would die back. They would actually sort of decompose, blow away in the wind, and there wouldn't be any sort of layer of fuel between the species. We've unfortunately, as humans, introduced a suite of invasive grasses and other species that now form a layer of fine fuel throughout the landscape and connect shrub to shrub to shrub. And at the particular site I was at, we had, again, a layer of fine Mediterranean grass or schismus at the site. And that had caused, somebody was smoking and hiking, don't do that, and had, started a fire essentially on the plot, and it got out of control really quickly. So we need to be really mindful of this. Sadly, a study a few years ago that we want to kind of repeat maybe at this plot, only about 10% of Joshua trees survive wildfire. So not a great survival rate for Joshua trees. And so the park said, well, what can we do with this information? Well, let's establish, you know, fuel breaks around the Refugio. Let's tell firefighters, if we're gonna have a fire, we need to protect these stands because those are the stands that will persist into the future. So it's resulted in a really direct application of science that we hardly ever get, right? We usually do science and we write a paper and it goes somewhere on a shelf and some people read it. But in this case, it resulted in like a direct management action, which was really satisfying and cool. So we're still working with them to even improve those models, improve their how they adapt to that. And then local entities are planning seed banks to essentially restore habitat. And what is interesting is that Mojave Desert Land Trust is one of the leaders in the Mojave Desert doing this, and they had the burn on their land, and so we're looking forward to doing some experiments with them to see how best they can restore lands, which should be applicable to across the Mojave. So that's exciting. So how will Joshua trees survive? So existing environment. So like I said, we have this wonderful topography in California, mountains, a lot of different slopes. And essentially, Joshua trees will have a hard time crossing flat distances. To jump into the same cooler climate, you'd have to go about 10 kilometers to get the same, different climate as you would be 10 meters uphill. So because of this topography, these trees are able to, quote unquote, move or recruit better uphill. So that might be a way for them to survive into the future. And then, of course, human actions. Okay, so that's a graphic showing you uphill. They can move uphill, but then they'd have to move great distances across topography. And remember, there's already species in these habitats they might move into. And so we'll have to see what happens with that. So I want to thank our national park partners, all these lovely people that participated in this study. It took a great deal of work. This is even within a bigger framework of studying many species with the park. So we actually have spring break groups come out. You would contact the park to find out about that, alternative spring break groups. We've had several of them contribute to this particular research, which was really fun. The park superintendent, David Smith, has been incredibly supportive, and all of these people collecting data diligently. It's been really awesome. So the take-home message is kind of, so the future might be troubling for Joshua trees. We've already measured changes, like I said, in that recruitment at those plots and where the newest trees are occurring. And things are likely to get worse, unfortunately, but the degree to which this happens depends on human action. So you saw the three scenarios. We have business as usual, where we keep very few trees, and we have mitigated scenarios where we keep, as many as 20% of the trees in the park. So it's something to think about. It's sort of a tangible outcome when you think about climate change and what can physically happen due to our actions. So, and again, what can you do? So participate in science. A lot of you are science majors, I hope. So you will participate in science, continue to persevere in this environment. I hope many of you continue to graduate school. Participate in science, support education, understanding of climate change that's science-based. Support responsible renewable energy development, something to think about, balancing the different needs that we have as a society with biodiversity, and then what renewable energy might mean on the landscape as well, because solar has been established in a lot of desert areas. So something to think about, a trade-off there. Seed banking efforts are awesome. Support your gardens and land trusts. Understanding issues of environmental justice, understand that this climate change, we're talking about Joshua trees, but remember, it also differentially impacts different communities. So understanding how it might impact people who can't afford the higher AC bills and so forth is really important, and supporting those groups as well. Supporting equity, diversity, and inclusion science. We definitely need all the voices in the room. So lifting people up who are underrepresented in science is really important. So supporting that effort and supporting access to parks and open spaces as well. And your vote. So using your vote to vote for support of science funding and evidence-based decisions in, for example, public health we're seeing right now. So just think about electing officials that are taking science and scientific officials seriously. So with that, I want to thank all of our partners. Earthwatch was major support for this. UCR Palm Desert, National Park Service, and MDLT. And so with that, I think that is what I have. So thank you for listening, and I hope you have some questions. Throw them out.
Yeah, thank you so much, Dr. Sweet. Okay, we have like 10 minutes for questions. If anyone wants to unmute themselves and ask a question, please do.
And while you're thinking about that, I want to note that the UCR Botanic Garden director is my old PI, Jody Holt, and she said they do have some Joshua trees at the Botanic Garden. So when it opens again, please check them out.
So I do have a question. So Joshua trees, you talked mostly about this specific area, like the Joshua Tree Park and surrounding deserts. Do they appear anywhere else in the world?
They would only be planted if they appear somewhere else in the world. I think there's some myths floating around about where else they occur in the world, but nope, this is where they've always occurred in a native way. So nowhere else in the world. Yeah.
So then if we don't do something about the way climate change is hurting this area, that's it for them then, huh?
Yeah, pretty much. I mean, I often get a question about, can we just move the trees? And again, it's that question of, well, you're moving it into an area that already has species there. There's different soils. You have to get the yucca moth there. So trying to transplant species is a big question. Climate forward restoration. It's all a big question mark as to whether it would be successful or not. But yeah, if it goes away here, it'll go away a lot of places. And I think, this is an important tree. Of course, it's a really important tree in the ecosystem, but there are species that are even more vulnerable that don't get the press. I don't think we're going to get a lot of press about, the yucca night lizard or maybe even pinyon pine, which is actually even more vulnerable. So I think this tree stands for the biodiversity of the Mojave Desert, which I think is valuable. That answers your question. This is a photo I took of this was the moon right in my neighborhood, resting on a Joshua tree.
Okay, well, if there's no other questions, we'll let Dr. Sweet go. Thank you so much for coming today and doing this. It means a lot to the Office of Sustainability, and I'm sure everyone coming. So if anyone in the audience wants to share this, or if you want to watch it again, we are going to be posting it to the Office of Sustainability's YouTube page and possibly the Instagram if we can get something that big on there, like such a big file, but definitely look out for it.
Thank you. Yep. And my email's on our website at UCR Palm Desert. So if anyone has questions about continuing in science or about this presentation, feel free to email me there.
Right.
Thank you.
Thank you.
All right.